Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started with our first presenter, which is Heather. She's got her slides here up on the screen. So if you cannot see the slides, please let us know in the chat box and Jean and I will help you kind of troubleshoot that. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and also turn off my video so that we can focus on Heather's slides. So again, if you need anything, type it into the chat box. Gina and I will be here. Thanks, guys. Take it away, Heather.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Sorry about the quick little spin through there. I hope you didn't get dizzy. So I hope you all are hanging in there during this tough time. I know that we're all getting a little tired of being inside. So hopefully having a gardening training today will be helpful and maybe get you thinking about the future and when we can finally be close to one another and working with kids again. First thing I wanted to do is just give you a little background for those of you that are not familiar with who FSNE is. Our program is implemented by the University of Maryland Extension under the Family and Consumer Sciences Department. We are the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program known as SNAP-Ed. Some of you may be familiar with the program called the Food Stamp Program. That's who we are. We're funded by USDA's Food and Nutrition Service, and we provide nutrition education for volunteers and professionals, as well as outreach in the community with low-income individuals and families. We have staff in every county and in Baltimore City. We collaborate with more than 100 state and local organizations, including duty centers, schools, farmers markets, farm food pantries, out-of-school sites. We have hundreds of different collaborators and different types of sites. We work in schools, as I mentioned before, as well as preschool, and some of our programs even filter into high school, although we don't typically do any direct education with high school, but a lot of our programs have been used in high schools. Schools that we work with are 50% or more free and reduced meals eligible. We provide nutrition programs and gardening for nutrition, and those can expand into so much more. Our main goal is to really create policy, system, and environmental change in sites. So we want to make our interventions really stick and matter anywhere that we work. We have 5 initiatives within FSNE or FSNE, you can call it whichever you want. The Healthy School Communities Initiative, that includes any programming that we do in schools. That could be Train the Trainer, where we actually go in and train staff to use our curricula. We also have programs like Smarter Lunchroom, where we actually work with cafeteria staff to help promote healthier options and even provide tastings to students to get them to try things they might not usually try. We work with food pantries within schools. We do farm to school programming. You name it, we've got a lot of programs in schools. We have our Healthy Tots, Healthy Families program initiative, which works with duty centers and early childhood centers. We have Healthy Changes for Out-of-School Youth. So these are programs that are not on the school campus that are designed to provide a safe place for kids to go when school is not in session. So this could be before school, after school, during holidays and breaks, and during the summer. Farm to Family, our primary focus there is really connecting the community to farmers markets and local farmers. And we also now have a training with farmers to help them to really promote their products to low-income individuals. And then finally, our Securing Food Resources for Families. This is a program in which we work with food pantries and food banks, also helping to promote healthy options. And we do provide some education to folks who are getting their food through these sites, as well as with the volunteer and staff. We do support lots of youth gardening programs, primarily in our school programs and early childhood programs. Youth gardens provide opportunities for kids of all ages to experience the whole excitement of growing their first vegetable and harvesting it and tasting it. And it gets kids to try more things from the garden. They can learn how fruits and veggies are grown. They can develop a greater appreciation of local agriculture and gardening and are more eager to try more things. They're a great way to bring parents and the community together to support those gardens. It's a great way to support local farmers and farmers markets. It can bring school and community gardens together and ultimately, hopefully, increase fruit and veggie consumption. So now what I'd like for you to do is just take a moment and picture what you think is a school gardening program. We all may have a different idea of what a school gardening program would be to us. It could be, some little container gardens. It could be, a grander program like I have on the right there. That's an Alice Waters school gardening program. It could be a community garden. It could be anything. As long as it is involving youth and growing food or growing plants of some sort, that is a youth gardening program. It doesn't always have to take place in a garden. There are activities that can happen in a classroom or inside, but it's really just bringing kids to nature and getting them involved in gardening in some way. Now, I'd like for you to picture either a program that you're currently involved in or something that you might like to do, and think about what are some of the challenges at this site. If you want to write these down so you can come back to it later, that's fine. Do you have at least one champion at that site? By champion, I mean like one person that's really excited that would support the program, that's going to be a team leader, that's going to help to really make this happen. And that person is not you. Do the goals of the site match your goals or your program's goals for this program? So just take a moment and think about that and maybe jot down some notes. And you might want to, think about it as we go through this little presentation. So as I mentioned before, I don't want anyone to ever go it alone. Particularly those of us in Extension, whether you are an educator or a Master Gardener volunteer, or even if you're a program coordinator outside of Extension. It's important to make sure that you always have a good, sustainable gardening team. You need to ensure that there's adequate buy-in and support from the site. I've seen way too many programs just flop because it's a one-person program, and if that person gets sick, if that person leaves, if they lose interest, if they become busy with something else, the program just dies. So you always want to make sure you have stakeholders and people involved. So this is why I'm speaking with you today, is we need to take time to plan ahead and work out all those details of the garden that involve the people first before you take that first step to getting into that garden. So keep in mind that most people love the idea of a garden and they're excited to have someone else come and do it, but they don't consider what it really takes to make it happen. So don't be afraid to suggest a scaled back version if you kind of get a feeling that maybe your partnering site isn't quite on board with you. It's okay to do that because you can always make it bigger, make it better down the road, but you really need to make sure that you have a sustainable program before you get going. So take a moment and define your school garden. So here are a few questions I want you to consider. Where would the garden be located in the school or in your site? Who will use the garden and how will it be used? Who will plant, maintain, and harvest the food from the garden? So really do all the dirty work in the garden. And it's okay if you might want to be involved in some of this, but you shouldn't be the sole person leading it all. So, ask yourself who other than you could lead a lot of these things. What kind of garden would meet the needs and goals of this program? How will food from the garden be used? Are there any school policies or regulations in place regarding school gardens and/or groundskeeping? This is an important one because I've seen too many, particularly programs in schools. I keep going back to school garden, where if you don't have a good rapport with the maintenance team, you could be in big trouble because they might mow it over, they might decide to blow grass clippings in it. You want to make sure that you have everybody on board and that you're friendly with everyone. Consider how the garden can be used to reach more than just the students working in the garden. So think about how at this site, it may be used by other teachers. Make sure that everyone feels welcome to utilize it and enjoy it. But you need to have some rules about that. Who can harvest? Who can, if others want to help maintain it, create a schedule. So really think those things through. These are all important questions that really should be answered prior to even putting the first trowel in the soil. Once the goals of the garden are defined, you'll need to get the project in motion. So identify your stakeholders and the roles that each will play in the gardening program. So in schools, you want to make sure that you have talked with administrators, maintenance staff, very important people, teachers, cafeteria staff, parents, community members, master gardeners, students. If you are a master gardener, speak with FSNE if it's a low-income school that we can work with, or other extension staff. Think of any stakeholders that could potentially play a role in your garden that could help to benefit it. This is how you build a good, sustainable team. Determine what kind of garden will be grown and where it will be located. Of course, I'm mainly going to be concerned with food gardens because that's what we do. We're trying to get kids to try more food and more healthy foods, but maybe you're looking at doing something with pollinators or wildlife or a baywise garden of some sort. So, really define your garden. Set educational goals for the garden. So this is where if you're working on a school garden or any kind of youth garden, work with the staff to determine what the goals are and how they might be able to complement things already happening at the school, at that site. So narrow down your stakeholder group to determine how everyone will contribute to the garden. So who's going to be your team leaders? You can certainly be a facilitator. You may be a member of your team leadership, but you want to have that, as I mentioned before, your champion. You want to have at least one or two people that are really going to be your champions that are going to help to pull things together and make things happen. So you also plan out who's going to do the planning and planting. Technical assistance, potentially master gardeners can come in and help with planning, whether they, if you are someone that doesn't really love working with kids, master gardeners could certainly help with technical assistance with planning and working with the staff to figure out what's going to go where, when it could be planted, how it could be planted, and come up with even a maintenance schedule. Also, you want to work with the team to come up with a schedule for that maintenance. When should it be watered? When should it be weeded and monitored for problems? And having some folks help with technical assistance with identifying potential problems in the garden. That goes a long way. And of course, funding. FSNE does provide funding for a lot of youth gardens, particularly in our school and preschool sites. But we really want our partners to be on board and to, occasionally, if they want to expand the garden beyond what we're able to do, we can also help them with grants and even help them come up with different retailers that they could approach for donations and that sort of thing. I always have lots of resources that I keep in my back pocket for funding. So if anyone's ever looking for that kind of information, let me know. And of course, we want to connect the gardens to healthy eating and nutrition education. So create a timeline and work with your team. So we want to grow our program. I mean, it's great you want to talk about it. You want to figure out what's going to happen with this garden. But there's so many different things that can be added to the garden. So for example, nutrition education is something that FSNE can certainly do. Tastings, why are we growing food if we don't get to taste it? So we want to incorporate tastings and make those tastings safe. Preparing food, that's so important to get kids excited about trying new foods. Not only are they getting to grow it, but then if they get to grow it and then help prepare it, they're more likely to eat it. Of course, growing food, farmer visits. This is something that FSNE has been working with for a while, is to really encourage the whole farm to school and getting kids to know about where food comes from. So even in the downtime, farmers can come to sites to talk to kids about how food grows. Or master gardeners, this is a great opportunity for you to pop in a site that has a school garden to talk about how food grows, or your own gardens. And as I mentioned before, we do link a lot of our programs to farmers markets. And these are all great ways to get kids excited about food, growing food, where it comes from, all at an early age. And hopefully by the time they're teens and tweens and maybe adults, they will have that passion for healthy local food. So I've devised something that's called a gardening planning checklist that our FSNE educators use. We've made this public on the SnapEd Connections website. So this is something that anyone can use. And I'll open it up in just a moment so you can see what it looks like. The only thing is there is a link at the very end that would take you to a worksheet that, when completed, comes to me. So you can certainly fill it out. If I don't recognize the name, I won't respond to you. But this is just a tool that that I think is very useful. It asks all those important questions that I've just been talking about. They're really necessary for planning a sustainable and safe gardening program. It's a good idea. You can print and share this with your partner when you're talking with them. You could even have them sign it, and that can kind of add a little bit of accountability. So they've, you know, when somebody signs something, they feel like, oh, I probably should do that. There's also a link at the end, as I said, that will bring it back to me. So you don't necessarily have to do that. Let's see if I can get it to open up. Here we go. So there's a link here that takes you directly to a food safety fact sheet. This is something I'll be talking about a little bit later today, is food safety. But I always recommend, anytime you're working with any kind of food garden with youth, is that you make sure that all your practices are food safe. So these are the questions that we really just went through. Does your site already have a garden, or is it supported by FSNE? Does it have a target? Who's your target audience? Who will be using it? When will it take place? How many gardens are needed? And this, I even have some links back to the extension website if you just need some resources to help you plan the garden. So this is the good thing. This is great, especially for our FSNE educators that are not gardening. Oh, is it not displaying? Okay, let me see. How can I do this? Let me go back here. Hold on. I think I have to tell it to display this particular page. Yikes. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, share. Okay. Is this, can you see it now? It should say at the top, FSNE garden planning checklist.
Gray. Yeah, still.
Okay, well, I'm gonna just skip it. It's there. I was hoping this would work, but it's not working.
Okay, we're on trial run.
Really? Okay, so can you see the PowerPoint again? Let me get back into that. Okay. All right, now where was I? Okay, this is what it looks like. Later on, it will provide links to all this, and you can actually, when you're, I believe you can potentially still click on these links, but if not, I'll provide a list of all the links that I've referred to in here. But this is something that I will share, and I believe I've already shared it at one point with Stephanie, but I'm not sure. We'll double check. But again, it asks all the questions that you might need to really plan your program. And it also even goes through the materials that might be needed if you're going to build an outside garden, even soil testing links. So you don't have to do all that extra work. It's already here. So it's right there in front of you. It makes it really quite simple to have that first meeting with your partner. So that's all I really have for planning a sustainable gardening program. I'm happy to take questions from anyone at this point. I wanted to keep it kind of short and sweet in case anybody had questions or would like to, discuss some situations or things that you have had to deal with in your programming. Thank you. I do keep a list of farmers. I work with Maryland Department of Ag, and I go to these expos and try to keep a good list of farmers. But I would actually recommend working with your ag agent in your local extension office, because they will also be able to direct you to local farmers that might be willing to work with you. Another great way is if you happen to be ever working at a farmer's market, I always recommend going up and talking with a farmer, especially if you see one that is talking with kids, and say, hey, you know, I'd love to have you maybe come and visit some kids at this site that I'm working at. So that's another thing that I would recommend. I saw a question come up about summer programs. During the school year, we are a little limited with our growing season. So we do typically grow things that can be harvested by the end of the school year. However, if we have a site that is going to have a summer program, then we will plant some things that can be maintained over the summer. Again, you may require some additional training and working with staff to make sure you have that buy-in so that it will be maintained. Sometimes that can be challenging, but we do sometimes work with out-of-school programs, and we're looking at ways that we can continue to support them. The majority of our out-of-school programs, we do more train the trainer. So we really train the staff on some of the programs that we do and help them to create a healthier environment. And we would like to expand back into supporting gardens into out-of-school sites. We had originally started a few, but we have very inconsistent audiences. You don't always know who's going to show up or how often they're going to be there. So it is something that I would love to look into for future, working with more summer programs. Let's see, I can't see all the questions. I just see a few things. Let me see. I'm going to get out of this so I can see if there are other questions. Oh, wait a minute, wrong button.
Jessica just said that she found that a great transition in sites is to do summer meal sites.
Oh, yeah. That's true. There are a lot of summer meal sites that happen to be at schools that may be working with school gardens. And so that's right, Jessica. That is a great transition, is if you're working with a school that is also going to be serving summer meals. A lot of times those sites may also have summer educational programs with kids. And so that's a great opportunity if the kids are going to be there for a while. There are some summer meal sites that are just strictly for meals. So kids will show up for the meals and they won't stick around. The summer meal sites are something that, they are really defined by the site coordinator. The school sites typically will have some summer programming.
We did also have, that was one of the questions that we've gotten in the chat box, is how are the gardens usually managed in the summer when school is out?
Okay. Again, we really, it's part of building a good sustainable team. So if you don't have a good team at the end of your school year, we have to put the gardens to bed. I'm actually going to talk about some ideas that can potentially lead into the summer in my next presentation. But it's all about who's on your team. So if you're going to have a different group of people working in a summer site, then you do really need to work with that team to make sure that they're on board with maintaining it. And you can plan what, you may just want to kind of shift your garden. So you would need to replant for summer plants, maybe. I see your question, Jessica. Maybe at the end of your school year. How many folks would be ideal for your garden team? Is that what your question was? Oops, goodness, what am I doing here?
That's right.
Okay. I would, sorry, bring this back up. It really depends on how large your garden is. School gardening programs can be as small as a couple of containers, or if you wanted to go bigger, you could have one raised bed and gradually expand it to multiple. So it really depends on how involved your team will be. And I want kids to be involved in any youth gardening programs. I don't want it to be one of these things that is really just adults maintaining it and kids occasionally get to visit it. That to me is not a beneficial project. You want kids to have access to the garden. So it's really part of the planning project. I mean, obviously, I think you would want at least 2 to 3 good team members. They don't have to be staff. They could be parents. They could be grandparents. They can be community volunteers. But you definitely want 2 to 3 good, strong volunteers to help out. Are there any more questions that I might be missing?
I think you've got everything so far.
Oh, yeah, I think we're good.
Okay. All right. Does anyone need to take a quick break before we start talking about engaging youth in the school garden? I know I'm going to take a quick water break myself.
Sure. And I can just add a little bit about how the gardens are usually managed in summer when school is out. So I used to work in the city for the National Aquarium, and one of the gardens that I know in the city was a community garden. They partnered with a local school, and they had the students kind of harvest the vegetables and stuff throughout the summer as sort of a summer camp. And they were able to sell the produce that they had at a local kind of farmers market type of event in the community. And that was really good because it was providing fresh produce to a community that didn't always have access to it. And it gave the students something to do over the summer. And it helped them to kind of learn about economics as well as gardening. So there were a lot of different school topics that they were able to cover and keep up with over the summer. And they really, really enjoyed it. So for anybody who's familiar with it, that was the Filbert Street Community Garden in Baltimore City. So that's a really great model. But again, as Heather mentioned, it does need to involve people who are really committed and interested in keeping that going for the students over the summer. But I think it does provide a lot of great opportunity.
Okay. Thank you, Stephanie. I appreciate that. See, I saw Michael's question there. What was that again? For some reason, I can only see them pop up like really quick, but I don't get the whole thing.
I think we're good. I didn't see any other ones come in.
Thinking about pollinator gardens, I think I saw.
Oh, he might have sent it only to you.
Oh, okay.
In which case you'll have to open your chat box because I can't see it on here.
Okay. And I'm trying to figure out where it is. Hang on.
You should be able to expand the chat box. There's a mini version.
Oh, that's what it is. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. I can see
arrow that's next to the chat. Little arrow. It should bring the whole thing up.
Yeah, I'm not seeing chat.
If you go to view and then panels and manage panels, it'll show you can add chat, or on your screen the three little
Here we go.
the dots at the bottom.
Okay. I always forget about the little piece at the top that drops down.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I see it. All right, let's see. Make sure I didn't miss anybody. I will definitely share my email address with you all. Stephanie has it, but what I'll do is I'll make sure that she has the links to everything once this is finished. And if that's okay, then we can share it with everybody. In fact, I'll even add it to this slide real quick so you guys have it.
Sounds great. And any links that you'd like us to add, I can put up near where the recording is going to be located on the Master Gardener website. So any resources from today, links, anything like that, we can have up on our website along with the recording.
Great. All right, let me see here. All righty. Okay, so can you all see food safety for school and youth gardens?
Yes.
Yes.
All righty. Guess we're changing gears now. So I work with, I'll tell you a little bit about my job. I am the Statewide Gardening Free Nutrition Coordinator with FSNE. I previously was a Master Gardener Coordinator in Talbot County, 2005 until the end of 2011. So I've been with FSNE for quite a long time, but I'm familiar with Extension and the Master Gardener program, and I've worked in a lot of different types of school gardens. And within the last few years, I've also gotten quite involved with food safety in the school garden. We do a lot of food safety when we're working with food with FSNE, but food safety is important from the very first second that we even start thinking about food. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And a few years ago, I partnered with John and some other folks in Extension and with the University of Maryland to create a food safety in the school garden fact sheet. And then prior to that, I worked with Department of Ag and MSDE, that's the Maryland State Department of Education, and University of Maryland, to put together some food safety in the garden presentations. What I'm about to present to you is kind of a smoothed out version. I don't want to scare anybody with food safety. Sometimes it can seem like it might be hindering your ability to do some things in the school garden. But I really want to try to make sure that it is comfortable and makes you feel like you can do this. It's nothing that's going to keep you from working with kids in the school garden. So first of all, food safety is extremely important. It helps to prevent injuries in and out of the garden. It also helps to prevent foodborne illness. And, you may not think about foodborne illness coming from a youth garden, but think about, coronavirus is a good time to start thinking about germs, unfortunately. But, lots of kids have runny noses and coughs and other things going on. So when you see them working in the garden with their little potentially dirty hands, that's one way that foodborne illness can be spread. So we really want to prevent any kind of injury that might potentially happen in a garden. So in order to achieve these steps, we have to educate garden workers, which include everyone that's going to be working in the garden, to use safe practices. Making sure that any materials or containers that we might use in the garden are food safe. Making sure that soil, amendments, water, everything is also safe for use with food growing. Preventing injuries in the garden, preventing contamination in the garden, and then of course the safe handling of produce during harvesting and even preparing and tasting. So when I refer to workers, again, that is anybody that's working in the garden. So it starts with clean hands. As I'm sure everybody knows by now, we're supposed to wash our hands in warm water with soap for 20 seconds before and after activities in the garden, or even when working with any kind of food. Hand sanitizer or sanitizing wipes that are made for hands, not the Clorox wipes for tables. They are also okay to use. If I were to choose between the two, I would go with the wipes, because one of the best steps of washing your hands is actually wiping off any of the heavy debris that might be on the hands. So while hand sanitizer is great, you still might have debris on, especially if it's soil, potentially still on your hands. So that last step of drying the hands is really important. Gloves can be used on clean hands, but as I've seen in many situations, we own a restaurant too, and I've seen kitchen staff that I've had to talk to about this, but gloves are not a magic shield to germs. Just because you have gloves on does not mean that you're not potentially spreading germs when you touch one thing and then move to another. So if a gloved hand touches something that could potentially contaminate, then it has to be removed, hands washed, and they should be replaced. These things that kids often just don't think about is scratching their heads, coughing, sneezing, using the bathroom, eating and drinking. Some gardens that we work with actually have livestock, so touching livestock, potentially animal waste or any animal products, those are things that can contaminate hands. In case of any injury, hands should be washed with soap and water, and a bandage should be applied, and then a clean glove applied prior to returning to the garden. So even if someone wasn't wearing a glove prior to an injury, they do need to wear a glove before returning to a garden. You can make up fun lyrics to a song to make hand washing fun. So I don't think anybody wants me to sing this, but you can sing along to in your head, or since you're all muted, feel free to sing it. But I made up, instead of happy, I made a happy hand washing. So, make it fun. Maybe do this at home while you have to wash your hands continually. I've actually been using this because I timed it. It is actually 20 seconds if you kind of sing along to the tune. It's also important to make sure everyone is dressed properly for being outdoors and for the garden. For all of you gardeners, you know the importance of protecting yourself from sun, exposure to ticks and other creepy crawlies that could be waiting for you in the garden, and even protecting your hands from potential injuries in the garden and your feet. So first of all, even though we may be working in some summer programs, we need to discourage and really just not allow open-toed shoes. I know I'm an offender at home. I'm terrible about wanting to wear shoes. But if I'm working in the public, I'm going to wear closed-toed shoes. Also, sunscreen, insect repellent, these are things we don't have to be responsible for applying. This really kind of falls on the teacher or whoever's running the site or is in charge of the children. Oftentimes they'll have parents apply it before coming to school. But this is something you do want to make sure that, you know, kids are protected. We don't want any liability to fall on you, but we do want to make sure that we've at least, you know, made it known that this is something we would like for them to do. UV shirts and hats are also a great idea. They're not required, but it certainly helps. To prevent ticks and other insect bites, long pants tucked into socks and closed-toed shoes are certainly helpful. And if using garden gloves in the garden, it's also a good idea to clean them after use. I kind of talked about this a little bit about preventing illness in the garden. If students are sick or have been sick within 24 hours with any, you know, potential symptoms that could be contagious, like fever, diarrhea, vomiting, cough, runny nose, sore throat, it's really best to not have them perform any tasks that would require them to handle food. If they're not necessarily, you know, they've been free of symptoms for 24 hours, I still would have them do other jobs. So some of these could be charting the progress of the garden, doing some journaling, making signs for the garden, plant tags, research for the garden, or even looking up recipes for ways that produce could be used for the garden. And those are just a couple of ideas. I'm sure you can come up with other interesting things for them to do. This is a poster that is available on our FSNE toolkit, which I'll share with you. I was going to click on it, but I'm afraid to take you into nowhere land again. This can be, you know, reprinted, or if you're working with a FSNE educator, we can provide these printed. What we typically do is this is a poster that we will project on a smartboard or whiteboard in a classroom before going out to a garden. But it might be something that someone might want to recreate or print for after-school programs as well. It's always important to come up with your own rules. Maybe these aren't the rules you want to use, but come up with just some general rules to kind of let kids know what their expectations are for the garden, and come up with, you know, simple rules that also protect the garden and protect, you know, just keep things clean so that we can prevent injuries. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Some of those include like no running in the garden, hold garden tools facing down, wash hands before and after working in the garden, wear appropriate clothing, respect animals and insects, wash produce before it's eaten, roll up and put away hoses when they're not in use. Those are just a couple of things. It's always a good idea also to have a first aid kit on site for minor injuries. Ensure that everybody knows where the nurse's office is located. This is if you're working at a school and it's still open. In an after-school site, it's always a good idea when you're having that planning meeting to, you know, find out what the policies are if someone were to be injured and who that contact person is, so that you can react quickly and make sure that the children know that as well. Ensure everyone knows your procedures for injuries, as I just said. And again, volunteers and our FSNE educators shouldn't necessarily be administering first aid, but I certainly wouldn't want a child to be, you know, left there bleeding with no one to help them. So, you know, make sure that you have a good plan in place. Ensure that minor cuts and wounds are washed and bandaged, and if the child can return to the garden, any hand wounds should also be covered with a single-use glove, as I'd mentioned before. You also want to plan a safe garden location. So when I say safe, I'm really thinking more of potential hazards or potential things that might contaminate the garden. So first of all, you want to make sure that you have a level area for a garden. Avoid any areas that might produce harmful runoff, such as sites that are downhill from a parking lot. Even looking if you're kind of downstream from a farm field, road, dumpster, other potential hazards. If you're going to have a garden that's going to be in the ground, testing the soil for lead. Check for potable water, and that's water that's safe to drink. Irrigation. Sounds like some folks maybe are not muted. I can hear some background noise. So if you're not muted, you may want to go ahead and mute. School courtyards are actually a great location for gardens in most cases, because usually you have access to water. They're also somewhat protected from wildlife invasion and potential runoff. And they are enclosed, so they tend to be a little bit warmer. This is a pretty grand school garden. There's a lot of different things going on here. This is not necessarily what I would recommend starting with, but you could certainly, build up to something like this. You also, when planning, you want to look for signs of wildlife. This is a little rabbit nest. If you see something like that, you kind of want to just be aware of, you do have some wildlife living around. Avoid placing a garden near a bird feeder, a bird house, or bat house. You want to prevent those droppings from getting in the garden. I mean, they're wonderful to have, but we just don't want them hanging right above your garden. If you do see animal scat or other signs, remove it and do not eat the affected plants. So you kind of want to mark it so that everyone knows not to harvest there. This is pretty inventive here. This is one way that I've seen in a community garden that a structure has been built to try to protect from wildlife. I mean, it's even hard for people to get in there, so hopefully it would keep your deer and other pests out, but that could be quite expensive. There are other ways with netting, fences, and other structures to prevent invasion, but I just thought I would share that one for those folks that like to do a little light carpentry. Food safety for containers and other supplies, that's also important. So when you're planting a garden, make sure to use materials that are safe for food crops for planting and harvest. Avoid any treated lumber or railroad ties. There's a link embedded here that gives information on food safe raised bed materials. It's on the extension website. If you're using recycled materials for gardens, avoid tires or containers that once held paint or other potentially harmful chemicals. Oftentimes you'll see this sticker that says food grade, heavy duty, BPA free. You can also, if you're using plastics, look for these signs or these numbers. These are all things that will tell you if something is food grade plastic. Now we're going to talk a little bit about water. Potable water, or water that's been tested and is safe to drink, is preferred, but there are a lot of cases where that's not available. You may have to use a rain barrel. You may have to use a hose outside that might not be necessarily potable, but isn't, terribly harmful. It just isn't, potable water. In these cases, you may have to still use that water. You can avoid watering directly on the plants. If you wash produce with potable water, you want to make sure you're using potable water before you're consuming it. Peel root vegetables before eating them, and remove outer leaves of leafy vegetables. If you're watering with a hose, you can let the water run for several minutes to flush any heavy metal buildup. There are also food safe hoses out there, so that's another option to look into. With garden tools, the most important thing is to make sure that kids know how to use tools, and that you, again, have those rules that I talked about earlier about making sure that they understand how they're used properly. I have kids. I know that it takes a lot of reminding sometimes to get them to understand your rules, but we don't want them to use them as swords or lifesavers or any of those things. So it often takes a lot of reinforcement. It also is helpful to have child-sized tools that fit their smaller hands. So instead of having huge adult-sized rakes for a small child to use, have child-sized rakes and child-sized trowels. These things are available. There are lots of websites out there that have them. Of course, Amazon, they have them, but there are lots of different ways to find these child-sized tools. So I would really recommend going that way. Also, you want to use things that are age appropriate. You're not going to have a 5-year-old using pruners, I would hope, or any kind of cutting tools. So really think about their age and the job that they're going to be doing. There are some jobs that obviously adults are going to need to handle. Remind children to always walk in the garden and hold sharp tools face down. Tools should be cleaned off after every use. We know that as gardeners, if you're potentially, working in a garden that might have a disease, or if there's insects or other things that could potentially contaminate your garden tools, it's always a good idea to clean them. But also our hands could be, our children could be touching their faces or something else. We don't really want to have any bacteria build up on those tools. Limit sharp tool use and just use your best judgment. We're all adults here, and I think we can all make good decisions. Compost. A lot of sites are starting to do more and more composting programs, which I think is extremely exciting. But students should be wearing gloves when they're handling any kind of compost, whether it's commercially made or if it's compost they're making at school. It's a good idea to always keep a composting log and make sure that your compost has completed cooking before using it to prevent any pathogens. Avoid raw manures in compost and any, diseased plant material or even weeds and things that, if it's not fully heated to the right temperature for the right amount of time, you're not going to have any of these things kind of pass through. If you're using commercially made compost, it's a good idea to use Maryland Department of Environment certified products. You can check with your local municipalities for sources. One that I use pretty commonly is Leaf Grow, that's made in Montgomery County, but there are other good compost products that could work. Worm composting is a great method of composting, and this also works really well if you don't have a large area for building big compost bins. So that's something to consider. And I have a link here that also takes you back to the Extension website for more information on composting. Unfortunately, FSNE, we can't purchase materials for composting, but since we do work with Extension, we can provide resources and information to our partners. And this is also an area that some master gardeners have an interest in, that may be able to provide some assistance and technical training and that sort of thing. Garden soil and potting mix. At least with our FSNE gardens, we avoid buying any bulk products, mainly because we would have to ensure that it's tested first. We want to make sure that anything we're using is not coming from a commercial site that, they're moving because it has lead or arsenic in it. So we want to make sure that we're using safe products. So at least for FSNE gardens, and I recommend this for any of your gardens, is we purchase commercially bagged garden soil for our raised beds, and we mix it with a compost at a 1-to-1 ratio. You want to make sure you're using a good quality potting mix in your containers, and we also do tend to mix that with compost. This just helps to make it a little bit healthier. Many commercial products have additional soil amendments and even slow release fertilizers added, so make sure you read the bag to know what you're putting in. When it comes to fertilizers, we can use them in school gardens, but we typically, if we're using products that already have a fertilizer in it, then we probably won't use additional fertilizer. But if you do need to use it, make sure that it's only applied by an adult. It does have to be stored in a sealed container and kept out of reach of children. And make sure to follow the label for application instructions. The Maryland Department of Ag, they say that the label is the law, so we do have to follow the label. We also don't need to make any homemade remedies for any kind of fertilizers either, because if it doesn't have a label, we technically can't use it. So as I mentioned before, just check anything that you're applying to the garden and make sure but you're not double doing it. Pest and disease management. Practice integrated pest management. This is IPM, as some people know it, and this is really just monitoring and getting to know your garden. This is a great way to get kids involved and out into the garden. So when we're talking about our garden plans and garden management, this could be a regular activity that kids can do if you're trying to get more folks involved in a school garden. So if they see weeds, pull the weeds out. We can use floating row covers to help protect from insects and pests, and even with heat and cold. If you see a pest, pick it off. If you're squeamish about picking off a pest, pull off the plant or the part of the plant that's attracted or that's affected. We can use sticky traps, pulling and replanting, mulching and weed barriers. Again, avoid using homemade remedies. If something is not labeled for use in a garden, we cannot use it. I also don't recommend using a lot of pesticides in school gardens. There can be a lot of sensitivities, and we want to make sure that our food is safe. And while, I say wash the food before you eat it, I know that kids are going to pop things in their mouths. So it's really a good practice to just avoid using pesticides if you can. And there's nothing wrong with failures or dead plants. It's a good learning experience. So if something doesn't work out, we learned a lesson. We'll try something different next time. So don't ever make kids feel like that it's a big failure. It's always a good idea to just say, we're going to learn from our mistakes and we'll see what happens next time. Safe harvest. This is super important. It's always good, just like you're in the kitchen, you want to wash hands before and after. And again, protect your hands. If you have wounds on your arms, legs, anywhere, make sure that those wounds are covered. Make sure you're harvesting regularly and remove any rotten produce. We don't want to actually bring more pests to the garden. Use potable water for cleaning the produce. Clean all tools with potable water and soap before and after each gardening session. Out in the field, school gardens that happen to be flooded at time of harvest probably should not be picked because, again, if there's any runoff, things could become contaminated. Any produce with, that has fecal or any other signs of risk, like animal tracks or anything that could potentially be contamination, shouldn't be picked. And you could create what we call a no harvest zone. So as I mentioned before with wildlife, you could kind of, mark it so that no one harvests that area. If it's fallen to the ground, it can be removed and discarded, but probably shouldn't be harvested. If it's something that is growing underground, then that's okay. Like carrots, that's perfectly fine. They're growing underground, but if they shouldn't be there, we shouldn't harvest and eat it. Now, washing produce. If your produce is going to be eaten right away, you do want to wash it right away. So things like salad spinners can be used for leafy vegetables. You want to use potable cold water and rub it vigorously. You can even use a vegetable scrub brush to remove any visible debris. We don't need to use any chemicals or soap solutions. If something is not going to be eaten right away, but is going to be stored, I don't recommend washing it. Washing it can actually add moisture and increase microbial growth. Anything that's perishable, any of your produce such as strawberries, leafy greens, anything that's been cut needs to be kept in a refrigerator at around 41 degrees or below to maintain that it's safe and maintain its quality. Non-perishable produce should be kept in a clean, dry place until it's ready to eat. So as I mentioned before, this has come from a big collaboration of quite a number of projects that have happened in the past few years. This is the food safety in your school gardens, classrooms, and greenhouses fact sheet that I was talking about. This is found on the Extension website. Just a few final thoughts. Wash your hands thoroughly and often. Use your best judgment and common sense in the garden. Avoid injury by keeping the garden space clean. Practice IPM to monitor plants for potential problems. harvest often, remove any dead or rotten produce, and use failures in the garden as teachable moments and just have fun. So do I have any questions? Let me just open up my box here to see. Let's see.
So we didn't have any questions that came into the public chat box.
All right, let me see. I think there were just a few comments that I'll see if I can
So
find.
there's a comment about leaf grow, noting that it's good, but not a form of compost. We heard some other guidance recently that was similar. It is a soil amendment. And Laura shared a great thing that they do with students at one of the schools they work with. They actually have the students create a list of rules for working in the garden. And she said that they actually come up with a lot of similar ones to the ones that you guys shared for FSNE. So that was excellent. Thanks for sharing. We just had a question come in. What about allergies? So I'm assuming this is referring to students who have certain food allergies, maybe related to the ones in the garden.
Yeah, allergies, it can be food allergies or even environmental allergies. So it's always a good idea to communicate with the school nurse or with families prior to doing anything in the garden. If you feel that it's necessary to send out a note home to get a list of any potential allergies, that's always a good idea so that you can be aware. Now with tastings, kids will tell you just because they don't want to try a tomato that they're suddenly allergic. So it's good to know what is and what isn't an allergy. So that's always really helpful.
That makes sense. Excellent. Okay, and another question we had come in, is it recommended that school-made compost be used on veggie gardens or only on non-edible gardens? That's a good question.
That is a good question. Typically, school-made compost, again, you have to use your best judgment. If it's being properly managed and it is safe, it could be used in school gardens. But if it's just a general, classroom composting project, it's probably better to just use it in non-edibles.
I had a quick question. I've heard, cleaning your garden tools is important. How would you recommend going about that? What would you use?
There are a couple of different things out there. You could use I think it's a 1 to 10 bleach solution. If John's out there, he may have a better recommendation that I'm trying to remember. We have Clorox wipes, which can be used to wipe things down, soap and water, but you want to make sure things are dry before they're put away. Just anything that you would use to clean any other tools that you would be using around food.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right.
We have another question come in. Do you prefer using seeds or plants?
That's a good question. I'm actually going to talk about that in just a minute, but I will tell you my opinion. So it depends on the age group and also how long you're going to be gardening. If you're working with little people, it's fun to do projects where they get to see seeds germinate, but they also want instant gratification. So it's not bad to kind of do a little bit of both. So I'll talk about that in the next session. I think I got our schedule mixed up a little bit, so I apologize for that.
No worries.
But if you know that your time is limited, it's great to use plants because that way you can hopefully have something to harvest before you're finished working with kids. But there are lots of, as I'll talk about, lots of great reasons to use seeds too, because we want kids to see every aspect of growing. Is there anything else?
Those are the only questions that I've seen. So we are about an hour and 15 minutes into our session. So is everybody okay with just doing maybe 2 or 3 minutes as a break right now before we have Heather get started on her last presentation? Does that sound good to everybody?
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
Oh, I can answer this question.
Yeah, thanks, Heather.
Are sources for plants available, or is the school responsible for sourcing? in gardens that FSNE is working with. So in order for us to sponsor a school garden, we actually have to provide some sort of nutrition education intervention. In those cases, we do provide all the materials for the garden. We provide seeds, plants, soil, gardening materials, everything that's needed for the gardens that complement our programs. We do also have seeds, as I know the Master Gardeners do too. We have lettuce and Swiss chard seeds that we give away as incentives. There are some other sources if you need help locating plants for schools. But there are lots of different retailers out there that donate plants pretty readily to school gardens. Your big box stores like your Home Depots and Lowe's, they're usually pretty good about that, as well as some of your smaller garden sites. A lot of times they'll even donate some seeds that are after the season. So you may have to do a little bit of experimenting to see what's going to germinate. But does the school have to apply to participate with the FSNE program? No, they don't. We do typically only have, in most of our counties, only one educator serving an entire county. The school has to be at least 50% or greater free and reduced meals eligible. So it has to be a very low income school. We're limited to only however much we can handle. That's why we do a lot of train the trainer. And we do hope that Master Gardeners would like to partner with some of our FSNE programs so that we can expand our reach even more. But the way it typically works is a school will contact either me at the state office or that FSNE educator or the local extension office to see if we could work with them to do some sort of programming. So there isn't really an application. It's just a matter of trying to find a way to piece in that intervention. I hope that makes sense.
Julie also asked if there was a list of schools that already have programs.
The list can be changing. So I would recommend the best way to find out if there's a school that you're interested in working with, talk with the FSNE educator in your county.
Excellent. Okay, great questions, everybody. That's all the questions for now. So let's go ahead and take a 2 or 3 minute break so that folks can walk away, take a stretch, get a snack or water, whatever you need to do, and we'll come back in just a few minutes. All right, so it looks like folks are coming back in, maybe just stretch and nod a little bit, so that's good. Make sure to keep moving. Good job, everybody. So we've got another presentation from Heather, and then we are going to go into our presentations from Michael and from John, but we'll continue to take breaks and answer questions as we go through the sessions. So Heather, are you ready to do your final presentation?
I am. I'm hydrated. I'm ready to go.
Good. Excellent. All right, we'll go ahead and get started then.
All righty. So we had hoped to have Pam Hossamer, who is a FSNE educator in Montgomery County, and also some Master Gardeners present on engaging youth in the garden. But we had really wanted to have some hands-on things happening with that presentation. So Pam and I are actually going to work whenever we can finally be near one another to do another training at a later date. But what I'm going to share with you now is I've actually worked to pull some activities from a number of our FSNE curricula to share with you for just some fun, short little activities that can be used with youth. And in the current situation, it might even be a good opportunity to, if you have family members or friends or kids that you would like to interact with virtually. Some of these activities you could even do using FaceTime or Webex or something like this. So, keep that in mind. Some of these might be some fun activities. So let's get started. I'm going to have to move the chat box here. Alrighty. So, as I mentioned, I have a number of just short kind of hands-on activities that can help to first engage kids in gardening and get them interested. I like to take the approach of, starting small and building up, and gradually getting kids involved in gardens. Not necessarily, sometimes it's easier to just build a gradual interest rather than throw them out there. So this resource is going to be available in the next couple of weeks online, but some of these you can actually access on our FSNE toolkit, which we'll talk about as well. And I'm calling it Growing Healthy Youth Gardeners. So my favorite way to really introduce gardening with kids is seeds. There's so many fun things we can do with seeds. One of my favorite is dissecting seeds. So this, if you can see, this is a lima bean. It needs to be soaked overnight. And when you're dissecting a lima bean with kids, you'll take it out and you'll massage the seed coat off the outside, and you can open it up. And inside, you can actually see this little piece here that looks like little baby leaves. That's the embryo. And this is going to be leaves. And then there's going to be a long piece that sometimes kids will tell me look like a banana or a nose, and that's going to be a future root. But this here is the whole baby plant. These pieces are called the cotyledon, and the outside is the seed coat. And the lesson that I'll be sharing actually teaches kids about how this is all packed full of energy. The seed is, the cotyledon is a backpack of energy that helps that baby plant grow. And the seed coat is what protects them from harm, and also kind of helps them along the way as they get ready to germinate. This is a little diagram that you can see here of a seed as it starts to fill with water and swell, and a little root starts to pop out, and it'll start to grow up. And as it starts to develop leaves, it will actually start using, of course, sunlight and the roots for energy to continue to grow. As we talk about the energy in seeds, we can also talk about how it's really good for us to eat different types of seeds, because those seeds are full of energy. So you can talk to kids about the different types of seeds that we eat, such as beans. Popcorn is actually made from a seed, but corn, rice, nuts. Nuts are full of energy. That's probably one of our best ones. But you can go through a long list of different types of seeds. Another way is to explore different fruits to figure out where and how they carry their seeds. So we have another lesson in which kids will actually look at different fruits and look at the seeds inside or outside. Like here is a blackberry, and they carry their seeds on the outside. Then you have an avocado, that seed's on the inside, and it's a big seed. And you have tomatoes that have little tiny seeds inside. And I always love to remind kids, this is a good follow-up to that first seed dissection lesson, is that inside these seeds is a baby plant, and that just blows kids' little minds. I always think that's super fun to see their reaction when I tell them that. There's also some fun hands-on experiments. This is something we can probably be doing at home right now. So you can set up an experiment to demonstrate how water and nutrients move through the roots to the stems and leaves. And you can learn about xylem and phloem. And this can be set up if you're working in the garden before you go out, and potentially revisited when you come back in. This works really well with, of course, celery, since it is a stem. So you need a fresh cut piece, and you place it in water with food coloring. And then you can come back and observe how it moves up through the stem and into the leaves. You can dissect it and look for these little cells to see how it's being carried. Another one is, again, using really our food scraps. So we'll probably be growing a lot of these at my house because we're eating tons of celery and lettuce and everything else. So we're growing all kinds of plants. But you can grow a new celery plant or a new head of lettuce. So after you've cut up your celery, you just take the little stem and place it in a shallow dish of water, and it will gradually start to grow. And this is one happy teacher in Wacomico County that planted it in soil, and they continued to watch this grow and even harvest more stems of celery. This one happens pretty quick, and it's really a lot of fun to watch. I've also done it with heads of lettuce. These are romaine heads that you can do. There are lots of other things you could try. One of my favorites, I don't have a picture here, but we've eaten pineapple, we grill it, and I'll just chop the top off and just stick it in soil. And it's taken me 3 years, but I've harvested pineapples, little tiny pineapples, from just growing my pineapple from the stem. Gosh, I can't talk today, but it's worked pretty well. You can also, you can put carrot stems in there. You'll actually grow new leaves. You won't get a new carrot. It'll grow leaves. Eventually it could potentially go to seed, but they're fun to watch. Really anything. It's always worth giving a try. Herbs are fun to do with this. Another activity of starting your own plants, and this is one I was actually thinking of when we were talking about summer gardens. This is a great activity to do kind of at the end of the school year. I recommend either using a sweet potato you've already grown in your garden or an organic sweet potato to make sure it hasn't been dipped or treated in any chemicals to keep it from germinating. But you just place them in water. And as you can see here, I've used toothpicks to hold it up. It's grown a bunch of roots. This was after just 2 weeks. And then you see all these little shoots that will pop up out of it. In order to plant, what you'll do is you'll cut these off, and you can trim off the leaves. And what you'll do is you'll bury it and just leave a few leaves sticking up out of the soil. So you can bury, if you wanted a pretty long vine here and everywhere where there was a leaf, those little nodes will actually grow down and create roots. So these are called little slips that you're planting. I did this in a 7-gallon grow bag, and this is what I got at the end of the season. I like grow bags because you can move them. So if, let's say you start this at the end of a school year at a site and they decide they're not going to have a summer program, you can take it home. Or if it needs to be moved from one place to another, you can move it pretty easily. They really just need water, and they do really quite well. And they do look kind of funky. Like I had them kind of wrapped around each other, so they're kind of fun looking when you harvest them. I just took the grow bag and dumped it in a wheelbarrow, and my kids and I dug out the sweet potatoes. Once you're done, once you've harvested them, we dusted them off and kept them in a cool, dry place. And then we were able to eat them, I think we ate them within a week. But you would want to harvest them. They should be ready by late September, early October. You can also, while we're talking about recycling, we recycle plants, we can recycle containers. These are a couple of fun things that we like to do. And there is a lesson that will be in this kit that you'll be getting. This is just taking, this was a milk jug or juice jug, and we poked holes in it to make it into a watering can. This is a see-through carrot grower. And you'd be surprised. It actually does work, and it's kind of fun even just to watch the roots. It can take a while, obviously, with carrots. This is a little lettuce garden that I created in my office. It's not super sunny, or it wasn't when I planted it. I think it was a little weather like this, so it took a little while. But I just used a clamshell, like you might get grape tomatoes or strawberries, and I lined it with a moist coffee filter and put soil in there, potting soil, and some lettuce seeds, and it works really well as a little terrarium. And of course, if you don't want them to get too leggy, it helps to have some sort of light over it so that they don't grow up like this. You want them to be a little bit snugger and closer to the ground. These are some jars. These are baby food jars that have been made into containers for herbs. But really, takeout containers, plastic food containers, they just need to be well rinsed and clean prior to using them. It's fun to be creative, and kids love the idea of recycling. And for our low-income families, this is a way that they could potentially have home gardens without having to purchase a lot of materials. One note that I wanted to share with you is that SNAP-Ed recipients can actually use their SNAP dollars to purchase garden only seeds and plants. They can't purchase the soil and the other materials. Although during times like this, I'm sure that they would rather use their SNAP dollars to purchase food, but they can use their money to purchase seeds and seedlings. On a rainy day or even an indoor day or prior to even gardening, this is a great way to kind of introduce kids to, you know, where food grows and where it comes from. So this is a food system sequencing game. And these are some different sequences that you could have the kids create. First of all, you could ask them, let's say we want to eat a box of corn pops. How many steps would it take to get from the farm to our table? So here you would potentially lay out these cards, and then the kids would have to put them in the right order to get them to the table. So we have the farm, the corn is harvested from the farm has to be loaded to a truck, the truck takes it to a factory. This is really simplified, obviously. They make the corn pops is then loaded on a truck again, then sent to the grocery store. Then you could even say it has to go in the car before it even gets to your table. So that's a lot of steps just to get some corn pops. But if they wanted fresh corn, they could grow it in the garden. Then they only have to walk out back or out front. They wanted to get it direct from a farm. They could go to a farm stand or they could go to a farmer's market. Again, there might be a truck or a car involved in these, but that's a lot less steps than actually all of this for a processed food. So we want kids to learn the difference between processed and fresh food, and also the number of steps that it might take to have a locally grown food versus getting something that might be grown elsewhere. So there are lots of different ways you can use this, but it really helps kids to kind of make those connections. And we keep it simple. Another fun kind of rainy day activity is this game we have called Take Your Pick Game. This is a simulated grocery store shopping game in which participants will select foods based on prompts that are read to them. And this is usually set up as a relay. It helps to teach kids the benefits of different kinds of foods and the importance of eating a variety of colors and types of foods. So this is just an example of one of the prompts. So you would read, you've decided that you want to pursue a career as a pilot. You will need to have excellent vision in order to be a pilot. You've just learned that vitamin A helps maintain good vision, especially night vision. Choose either cantaloupe, winter squash, sweet potatoes, carrots, or apricots, since they are all good sources of vitamin A. And so we have photo cards. You would lay out all these photo cards of all kinds of different foods, and they would need to select something from that list that you just read. So these are what these photo cards would look like. There are quite a number of prompts that they read. And so as they're doing the relay, they're racing up to get these foods, put them in their grocery bag. And then at the end of the game, each team will empty their bag and they can take a look at what they have in there. And we hope that they'll recognize that there are lots of different colors and a wide variety of fruits and vegetables. And so this can really lead to a good discussion about healthy eating. Next, this is a fun one before even starting a garden. So, you know, we talked about planting a garden with the adults. This is a good way to kind of get kids thinking about what they want to plant in their youth garden. So this is kind of a bingo type game. So each student is given 2 cards or 1 card with a front and a back that has 2 seasons. And we also have photo cards, as you can see on the bottom here. These are just a few that actually represent different things that can happen in the garden. Pest invaders, weather, disease, all kinds of different crazy things. So as you're reading these prompts, different things will happen, and all the crops that are affected during that season has to be marked out. So let's say one of the prompts that you read says that the terrible tomato hornworm has shown up and all your tomatoes are gone. So this poor student that has this card with tomatoes has lost their entire crop. But in the next season, they would only lose 2 things in their crop and everything else would be okay. So it's a good way to really think through what you're planting. And we hope that they can connect too, that not only is it a good idea to plant a variety of different things, but it's also a good idea to eat a good variety of fruits and veggies. Next is the parts of the plant that we eat. I don't think anybody's ever actually seen this crazy plant in nature, but this is something that was designed to kind of represent the different parts of the plant that we eat. So we have roots, stem, leaves, fruit, seeds, and flowers. So we want to help kids to identify the different parts of the plant that we eat and learn the functions of these different parts, and also help to classify the different fruits and vegetables by the part of the plant that we eat. And then we also have a relay race that matches, in which they would match these different foods to the part of the plant. So if it is a rainy day and you need something to keep kids entertained, this is a great way to keep them moving and also learning about parts of the plant. And it helps them to understand a little bit more about growing and the importance of caring for plants at the different life stages that they're in. We have a website that's called the FSNE Toolkit. This is the link to the FSNE Toolkit. We have a homepage and we have all these different sections here. If you go to the Gardening for Nutrition section, there are a bunch of different links to some fun gardening activities, and the next couple that I'm going to go through are actually on this site. So you can always come back and take a look. Really, all you have to type in is FSNEtoolkit.com, and you'll get this main page, and then you can just peruse it for some fun activities. All of our curricula are over here in Lessons and Resources, but this new one that I'm talking about is not up there yet. I'll actually be sharing it with Stephanie whenever we do have it ready for you guys. So, as I mentioned, there's always a good time to use seeds, especially when first learning about gardening, and even with young learners and kids who just really need something to spark their interest but have a short attention span. This is what I like to call the seed baby necklace. I usually poke a hole in two sides here, but this is something that the kids can wear and they can watch it germinate, and then they can harvest the tops as microgreens. So I usually put a few more seeds in here than this. This is when I was just getting started out, but I like to use sprouting radishes or mustard greens because they germinate so quickly and they taste a little different than what they're used to. So it's just kind of a fun little thing to give a try. And I always tell them that, you know, it's important to keep them close to their heart because they're their babies and they need the warmth of their bodies to help them grow. I always tell them to take these off when it's time to take a bath or take a nap so that they don't get damaged. They can hang them in a window. Otherwise, they're to wear them and keep an eye on them. And, you know, this is a fun one kids seem to really enjoy. And it's amazing how quick these things grow just from being against your body. Only things that need to be done is I use the small baggies like you might find for like jewelry or something like that. They can be found on Amazon or Michael's, and a moist cotton ball and seeds. It's pretty simple. The next is the garden and glove, which I think a lot of people are familiar with. There's one thing wrong with this picture, and that's that they've actually sealed the top of the bag, the glove. I don't recommend doing that. I would put the tape on the inside so that it can still get air, but each finger should be labeled with a different seed, and you have a moist cotton ball in there, and then they can watch each one grow. And if you really want to get adventurous, you could actually push up the cotton ball and cut off the finger.
Just to let you know, we can't see the we're not following each section of the website that you're going through. We only see the main presentation. There we go.
Yeah, I'm not on the website.
Okay, sorry, we couldn't see. I think maybe it was stuck.
Okay, yeah, I didn't go to the website just because, okay, can you see it says Plant Small Gardening Experiments?
We can now. I think we were just.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure. With the rain here, my Wi-Fi could be a little delayed. So
No
yeah,
problem.
thank you for letting me know. After the last debacle, I decided not to try to go onto the website because I don't want to try to bounce back and forth and take anybody's time.
Yeah, must have lagged.
Yeah, so you can peruse it, but it's FSNE Toolkit, and you can find these. So this is the necklace. I hope you all can see it now. Here's your garden in a glove, and again, these are just the cheap, clear plastic food service gloves. There are a couple of fun ways to make sure you get the seeds where they need to go. If you're using smaller seeds, I usually use like a regular drinking straw, and they can drop their seeds straight down to the cotton ball where it's supposed to go, and make sure that they're labeled. And this one we borrowed from Prince George's County from Miss Esther, but this is the lettuce cup terrarium, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. So as I mentioned, you can visit the FSNE toolkit, which this is the website here, for a lot of ideas for now. And I am working with my graphic designer to get all the lessons that I talked about like ready and packaged so that they can be shared with everyone. All of our FSNE educators will be able to provide printed copies to any master gardeners that would like to use it, particularly with sites that we might be working with. And I will share a link with Stephanie where folks can download it as well. And eventually we'll even add it to our FSNE teacher toolkit. So now I'm able to take any questions anybody might have or additional ideas. Hopefully you were able to see that. I didn't realize that we might have had a little delay.
No worries. It's there now, so we're good.
Okay.
All right. So we didn't have any questions that came through yet during this session. We had a suggestion that grow bags are awesome and come in all shapes, sizes, and colors, so that's fun. We had a comment about cilantro microgreens being available now as well. And then we'll just give it one more minute in case folks have questions and there's a little bit of a delay with them getting through. And we'll have all these resources available together in one place for everybody. So the recording for the website and then all the materials that go along with it. Because I know John is going to have some materials that go along with his presentation as well. So we'll make sure that everyone's getting access to everything from this session. And if you're looking in the chat box, Heather just sent the URL for the FSNE toolkit where you can find some of these lessons. So make sure you check that out. All right, Heather, so we've got one question that did come through. When starting a new school garden at an elementary school, which grade or age group do you recommend working with first?
It seems like most of our requests come from younger grades. We get a lot of requests for kindergarten and first grade. They're always really responsive and excited to get involved in gardens. And I also know that there is a link to gardening in the Common Core in the Next Generation Science Standards with kindergarten. So that could be part of the reason. But typically with younger kids, I do smaller gardens. So I might start with a earth box or grow bags. But we have a lot of curricula that we use. So there could be a gardening theme with almost every grade throughout an elementary school. I found that in second, third grade, they can do a lot more. And as we get into older grades, kids they can learn about being young entrepreneurs even, and potentially have pop-up farmers markets and, work to provide food and even, some things for the food pantry. So there are lots of different ways to do it, but I do like to start with younger kids, at least with some of these smaller activities.
Okay, excellent. So basically just if they're younger, just obviously a lot more hands-on supervision or chaperones, stuff like that. Okay.
Yeah, as they get older, I could see working into some larger gardens. You have a little bit longer attention span, although not a ton, but yeah, you can certainly do a little bit more with older kids. And if you wanted to have larger gardens, older kids are better for that. And if you're working with middle school, they have to have service learning hours. So if they're local community gardens, I highly recommend connecting with middle and high school kids who need service learning hours to get them involved in gardening programs. I'm speaking more to folks that are maybe not familiar with FSNE programs, but they can work in gardens as long as it's approved by their school to help provide food for communities. So whether it is for food pantries or food banks, or sometimes even for their own school for fundraisers. So really, it's something that has to be approved by the the school, but those are other opportunities to get different age groups involved.
Okay. Excellent. And we've got a comment. One of our participants have found that small indoor gardens are a hit among teachers with younger grades. They can consistently see it and they don't have to go outside.
Absolutely. And I've been working with a nonprofit that has put in a lot of these tower gardens, which are hydroponic gardens. So you may see these popping up in your county. This is another way for kids to get involved with indoor gardens and have access to gardens and seeing them grow. So this is another thing that, you know, down the road, we may have an opportunity to do additional training on those.
Excellent. Very good. Okay, so we don't have any other questions. Oh, one more just came in. Any guidance on sending garden foods home to the kids' families?
I would recommend that what I would recommend to my educators is when harvesting produce that, again, like I said, if you're not eating it right away, it shouldn't be washed, but I would make a label of what it is and, you know, information on washing it, but it certainly can be sent home with kids to take to families. But if we wash it, we're increasing the risk of growing different bacteria microbes. So yeah, you just need to maybe provide some information on how to do that safely.
Good idea. Excellent. Any other questions before we switch presenters? Okay.
All right, I'm going to get this off.
Looking good. Thanks so much, Heather, for your time and for all your expertise. And we'll work together to get all those resources made available. Much appreciated. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, have a good day, everybody.
So we're going to take time to transition to our next presenter. So if you wanted to take a break for anything, now would be a great time while we get switched over to Michael, who will be presenting Insects as Friends for our next presentation. So go ahead and take a minute if you need it while we get Michael set up to present. All right, everyone, so we've got Michael's presentation up on the screen. You should be able to see it. So Michael Andorsky is a Baltimore City master gardener, and he does a lot of work with their pollinator program. So he's going to be presenting a very kid-friendly and excellent informative insect presentation for us. So Michael, everyone can hear you. I'm going to go ahead and let you take over.
Okay, great. Sorry there's no camera, but this computer has no camera and it won't be here for another 5 days from Amazon. So I'm one of the two co-chairs of the Baltimore City Master Gardener Pollinator Committee. And I've given lots of talks about pollinators. And I always notice that at the end of the talk, people always have questions about, is it safe to have bees in my garden? So I added on a section about that. And then I was asked to expand that to insects in general. So this is a talk about insects in general, why kids are scared of them and what to do about it. So the problem, first of all, is that bugs is a very pejorative kind of statement, that kids are afraid of bugs. And part of it's because of the name bugs. Bug in Welsh is BWG, pronounced boog, which means goblin. And back in the Middle Ages, bug meant something frightening. So right away, we start off with having insects have a pejorative meaning. True that some insects do cause problems. So here's a young girl with lovely long hair, and on her hair are lice, and we don't want kids to have lice. And here are ticks, which are found not so much in the garden, but rather in long grass. But ticks can be outside. And the third, of course, is cockroaches, which cause all sorts of indoor problems, including spreading salmonella. But these are not found in our gardens. So why are kids so afraid of bugs and bees? Well, part of it is because misinformation they've been giving about insects. And part of it is because they don't have a sense of control over the insects they deal with. And importantly, it's because they've never been able to develop a sense of wonder in what they're looking at. I mean, insects are, if you look at a 100 square foot garden, it's 10 by 10 foot garden. How many insects are living in that garden? 4 inches below the surface to a foot above the surface. And the answer is, in one form or the other, whether it's a larva or pupa or the adult insect, there are 1 million insects living in a 100 square foot garden. So there are a lot of insects out there, and kids need to be able to have a sense of wonder about them. But they don't, because they see pictures like this, and they figure, well, if a person who's a professional beekeeper has to keep this wrapped up in order to be safe from the bees, I better be careful myself. But of course, the beekeeper is around bees who are trying to protect a nest, not bees who are out by the flowers and the vegetables. I have to show the kids this picture, which is a girl smiling with bees completely covering her. So what are the bees doing there? Well, as I show in this picture, she's wearing a little plastic box inside of which is a queen bee. And so the other bees are all trying to protect her, protect that queen bee. They're not hurting her at all. They're not stinging her at all. She's quite happy about this. And that's the picture that kids should see. Not that they're going to end up having bees all over them in the garden, but they know that bees alighting them are not going to harm them. So when I ask kids about who's been stung by a bee, a third of the kids and some of the adults raise their hands. And when I talk to them further about it, it turns out that not many have been stung by bees. Most of them have been stung by wasps. So the first thing to do is to tell the difference between a bee and a wasp. So a bee is very hairy because it has to hold on to the pollen. The legs are hairy, the body is hairy. They tend to be broad and round, as opposed to having a very narrow waist, such as the wasp does, and being not hairy at all, having these bare, thin legs. So a wasp has a pinched waist and not any hair on the body, as opposed to the bee. So what do we have here? Well, this one's pretty hairy and fat. That's a bee. Here is another bee. Over the 400 varieties we have in Maryland of native bees. Third bee, all of them very hairy and not wasp-like. As opposed to this guy who doesn't have very much hair, or a little bit, and has very unhairy legs and a very pinched waist. That's a yellow jacket. Here's another kind of a wasp with a very pinched waist. So those are wasps. What about this? Is this a bee or a wasp? Neither. It's a fly, of course, because it has very big eyes. And that's how you tell the difference between wasp, bees, and flies. That even the yellow jackets don't sting you under most circumstances. So I'm going to show you part of this.
These are yellow jackets, kind of wasp. These are the ones you typically find buzzing around your outdoor cafes. And looking for food, they're not typically aggressive. I wanted to dispel much of the fear people have about yellow jacket wasps. Watch how docile yellow jackets are.
So the thing about yellow jacket wasp is if they're interested in food, they're not going to be interested in the person who's there. Yellow jackets are dangerous if you happen to be digging in the ground and you come across one, but not in an established garden. So kids need to have a sense of control. And this fairy tale shows why control is so important to kids. Here are the 3 little pigs taking away the big bad wolf. And kids are not scared by this fairy tale because they know that they're in charge. They know what to do to control the big bad wolf. As opposed to the original tale, the way Hansel and Gretel was originally told, was quite scary for kids because they were all locked up in a cage and the humpback witch is there looking rather mean at them, and they hadn't gotten to the end of the story to know what is going to happen yet. So a sense of control is important in letting children know what to do when they see insects in the garden. But most importantly is developing a sense of wonder in what they do see. because this million per 100 square feet of insects that they're going out to look at really are a universe in its own, and understanding what they're doing there and why they're doing it, and the fact that they're not going to harm you is very important for kids and adults. And so I start off talking about bees, and I talk about the magic of cross-pollination. So depending upon the age of the children, of course, we either talk about the male factor or pollen. Excuse me, hit the wrong button there. So the bee has to take the pollen dust all the way over to the next flower, dump it in the pistil where it combines with the ova and the pistil to form the new seeds. There's a flower, and that's where the pollen is coming from, and that's where the pollen has to get to in order to go all the way down the pistil to form the new seed, which is very important for us. So Heather talks about all those wonderful vegetables to plant in the garden. 80% of them wouldn't grow if it weren't for the bees. So here's a flower, and here's the pistil, an ova, and those combine, and they form the seeds, which of course form the fruit, in this case, the tomato that we eat. Here's a tomato on the vine. The kids often don't notice the flower, but without that flower, you're not that fruit. Then I talk about the bees and the wonderful marriage they've had with the flower. We only talk about the bee part of this for now. So how does the bee get to all that honey? First of all, it has this long tongue, the end of which acts like a sponge to suck up the nectar, so it can bring it back and make honey. And the second part is a tube which actually sucks it up like a straw. And these antennae in the feet all have little cells which can sense smell, so they can smell the flower. Bees smell 200 times better than we do. And then they have these big eyes, which are like our eyes. They see for vision, so they can navigate by finding places to navigate to and actually making a map of where they're going. And they often have to travel 2 miles to get there. And these three little eyes over here are for navigation, and they use the sun to navigate and polarized light. And it's quite a fantastic and a wondrous thing to see. Then they collect the pollen, and they collect it on all their little hairs, which are all spiked hairs, so they hold on to the pollen a lot better. A bee can hold on to twice its weight in pollen, twice its weight, and flies 2 miles to get to the nectar source and back again. Quite incredible. These little areas on the legs, called curbiculi, hold a lot of the pollen as well. So that's some of the wonder of the bee. And this is the bee at work. This slow motion bee, actually a bee can see about 600 flowers in 1 hour. You see he's putting his nose all the way down to get the nectar. He has pollen on his back. And I'll just move this along a little bit here, speed them up. On to the next flower, and so on and so forth. So that is a bee in action in our gardens. Then they need to talk about metamorphosis. So morph means shape, and meta means change. So we're talking about change in shape. And every living thing undergoes some sort of change in shape from the time it becomes an egg to a young animal to a grown animal. So this is incomplete metamorphosis because the young chicken looks like the old hen. Has a beak, they both have eyes, they both have feet. That's incomplete metamorphosis. So who else has incomplete metamorphosis? Well, we do. So people are fond of saying, oh, that baby looks just like me or my husband. And he does look just like you or your husband. And the taller the baby gets, the more muscle he gets, the more like your husband he will be. Incomplete metamorphosis. Complete metamorphosis means a complete change. So you start off with an egg, and then you go into a larva, also known as a caterpillar if you're talking about butterflies, and that goes into a pupa, and that goes into the butterfly. That's complete metamorphosis. So here's an example of a bee's metamorphosis. It starts out as an egg, it goes into a larva, goes into something that looks more like a bee, but not really, more like a ghost of a bee. That's the pupa. And finally, it emerges from the hive as an adult. Example of the birth of a bee. This is all sped up. It actually takes about 26 days for a bee to go from egg and be born. I hit the wrong button. Let's go back. Here we go. There are the larvae. And now the larva is changing. Pupa. And emerges as a bee. Some of you have made it notice there were some little brown bugs in there as well. That was a varroa mite, which is infecting the nest, but that's for another talk. So now we're into the garden with some of the bugs that we can see. So this is an aphid. So aphids have incomplete metamorphosis. The babies look something like the adult. They're just a lot smaller, and they go through several instar stages. So aphids, we know in our gardens, we don't want them there because they destroy the plants. So this is a picture of a soy plant and that's a soy plant after the aphid is there. And we don't want that to happen. So it turns out in nature, there are several animals, other insects that protect our plants from the aphids. So this is an aphid midge, which is a kind of fly. And the aphid midge produces this larva, and the larva injects into these aphids over here, a poison which paralyzes them, and then the larva eats the aphid. Very helpful for our gardens, nice for kids to know about, especially since it's harming the aphid, not them. This is a lacewing, a beautiful thing that becomes this larva, also called an aphid lion because of how many aphids it can eat. And this is a ladybug. Kids usually like ladybugs. You know why it's called a ladybug? It's called a ladybug because back in the Middle Ages in England, when the aphids were devouring the crops, the farmers prayed to Mother Mary, the mother of Jesus, to please send something to save their crops. And so Mary, who is known as Mother or Lady Mary, sent the bug, which was my lady's bug. And that's how ladybug became named. So this is a very pretty ladybug. And what's this ladybug? This ladybug, if you notice, is here with a bunch of aphids on the leaf. And there are also a bunch of ants on the leaf. So how are these insects interacting with each other? So at first, they're not interacting very much. Then after a while, we move it. The ants begin to attack the ladybug. Why are they doing that? They're doing that because they don't want the aphids to be destroyed by the ladybug. Why don't they want it to be destroyed? Because the ants eat the excrement of the ladybug and use it as food. And they don't want the ladybug to do that. But the ladybug is pretty big, the ants are pretty small, so it takes a whole bunch of them to get onto the together. And I'll move this on, show you the denouement here. And they push it right off of the stem, off of the plant, away from their food source. known as honeydew. Okay. Goes on in the garden. Kids can see this happening in the garden. It's a real wonder. Here's another pest for us human beings in the garden. This is the tomato hornworm, which eats tomatoes. Sphincter moss, which actually is a pretty good thing to have in your garden because it pollinates plants, but if your tomatoes are all dead because of the tomato hornworm, the sphincter never gets a chance to pollinate them. Okay, this is a picture of the tomato hornworm in action. So he's quite rapacious. Before you know it, there's no tomato. But there are insects that can protect against it. This is called a spined assassin bug. A spine because of the spine on its back, and an assassin because of what it does to various caterpillars, larvae, and to the tomato hornworm as well. It's also known as the kissing bug because, in fact, this can bite you, but the bite is so small that it feels like a kiss. So in the garden, if you see one of these and you put it on your skin, you may feel something, but it's not going to hurt. And this is a picture of this assassin bug at work. Slow motion. Let me move it on a little faster here until he comes across this insect, rather this caterpillar. And when he gets close to the caterpillar, you're going to watch its proboscis, its nose mouthpiece come out. Watch its headpiece. Watch right over there. One, two, three, zap. Okay. Here's a brachioid wasp. This wasp also takes care of the tomato hornworm. How does it do that? It does it by planting its larvae into the wasp, and the larvae then grow, and when they grow, they eat the wasp. Here's a tachinid fly. Tachinid fly also eats lots of unwanted insects in the garden and doesn't bite kids. Then there are all of the beetles. Most beetles don't fly. This is a ground beetle. They usually eat decayed matter and caterpillars, as this one's doing. Here's a soldier beetle. Just a wonder to look at. It's called a soldier beetle because it seems to be wearing a leather jacket like a Hessian soldier. And this is a milkweed beetle. We see this in milkweed plants all the time, and they eat the milkweed plants, which is okay because they don't eat all the milkweed plants, but if you don't want them, you can just wipe them off with your hands. They will not sting you at all, and they're quite pleasant to look at. And this, of course, is the milkweed caterpillar, which become the monarch butterfly, all in our gardens. It's known about as the roly-poly bug because it likes to roll itself up like this. It eats decayed matter, not a problem for people. Here are two very large beetles. And so forth. Then we have the damselfly, beautiful fly that's so named because it looks, wings look like the dress of a beautiful damsel. Then the dragonfly. Kids have seen in the garden and they don't quite know what to do about a dragonfly. So we're going to show you about how a dragonfly functions here. Over here, let me back this second. Right there, where that circle is, keep your eye in this circle. This damselfly can fly 35 miles an hour and can eat a mosquito on the fly. Keep your eye on the red circle. Zappo. Then there are these other wonders that they don't look like insects. Well, this is a walking stick, so named because it looks like a stick. Quite safe for kids to play with. Plenty of reassurance from the mother here. Move it head a little bit. And so this is the true leaf insect, looks just like a leaf. Then we all know about the praying mantis that also looks like a leaf. And the praying mantis is a bit of a carnivore. Will eat not only plants, but it eats meat as well. And it even eats its lover. So here is a male carnivore who got a little too close and now is beheaded. Here shows you one at work.
You are creeped out by insects. You probably shouldn't watch this. You're creeped out by insects. Chew on it.
Let me move the head a little bit.
You are creeped out by insects.
And so on and so forth. Then there are the ants. Now, most ants have just one abdominal piece, whereas the fire ant has several abdominal pieces. And this ant actually can sting you, but we don't see very many of these in Maryland. The fire ant is very interesting because it can form bridges. Forming a bridge is a very useful, especially if there's a lot of extra water and the ants are going to drown and they have to move to a new place. So here are fire ants on the bridge. And they're moving from one place to another. Okay. This has just been a short way to show children about a whole world they may not know of before. To give them some control over it, talk about if you see a honeybee in your garden and the bee lights on you, don't be afraid of it. It just thinks you're a flower. And if you don't want it near you, you can walk away or blow it away, but don't bat your arms very wildly. The same thing for the yellow jackets. As for ticks, ticks usually grow in places that are very wet with tall grass. So if you're wearing long pants and you're not in the garden, tucking your pant legs in is a good idea. But of course, if you're in the garden, the things that are closest to the ground are not only your legs, but your arms, and you can't keep too warm in the summer. And that's not where you're going to find the ticks anyway. You have to give the kids a sense of control. And that gives them a sense of control. You got to correct their misinformation. And the misinformation is that the insects are out to hurt you, and that's not usually the case. Spiders, but the one spider that could hurt you is you don't find in Maryland. That's for another time. And then most importantly, you have to give them a sense of wonder of the incredible life there is out there in the garden besides the vegetables. So that's the end of the talk, and I'll take any questions you might have.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. So if anybody's got questions, you can type them into the chat box. We did have a comment that they like your insect video, so thank you for sharing those, Michael. One question that's come through, I'm often growing leafy greens before the end of the year. Who are the little guys often eating my leaves? Are the aphids?
You're talking about at the end of the year?
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of things that eat your leaves. If they're very little, they're probably aphids, yes.
Yeah, things like kale, lettuce, and chard, they're saying.
Aphids are not particular.
I had a question. Is there a certain bug that you think is kind of like a good gateway to the rest of the bugs? Like, is there one in particular that you think kids really enjoy kind of like seeing up close and learning about that might kind of start encouraging them
first
to
of
get
all,
more into it?
all the ones that when you see a walking stick in the garden,
Mhm.
that's always the kids love that. I love that. It's so incredible to see the stick walking across the garden and so forth. So look for walking sticks. The bugs that you'll see a lot of in the garden, of course, are the ladybugs.
Mhm.
So that's a good one to start with. The other ones you'll see are the roly-polies, and the kids like that because when they touch them, they roll up like roly-polies. But most kids know about roly-poly beetles already. But it's the fascinating thing is to watch what the insect is doing in the garden. Now, if you're looking at an aphid, you're not going to see much. If you find something that's eating a tomato plant, a caterpillar, it's quite a treat to watch them go after it.
Got it. Excellent. Okay, are there any more questions? Let me just check the chat box.
There's one from Anne here. My elementary school would not let MGs plant a flower garden near the school. Claimed that it would attract bees that could sting the students. Do you have any, I guess, thoughts or recommendations
Yes,
for that?
yes, I do. This is, first of all, if you see bees in your garden, they're not going to sting you. Okay? And I've taken kids up to where there's been a swarm of bees because they've left their hive and they're looking for a new place. And I show them, you get right next to them, they're really not interested in you. It's important, I think, for kids to know the difference between a bee and a wasp. And we talked about that earlier, how to tell the difference. The wasps in the garden aren't going to sting you either, but if you happen to step on a wasp nest on the ground, that's a different story. So if you see a wasp in the garden, it's not going to sting you. But if you don't want it near you, you either blow it away or you walk away. You don't bat your arms at it, and you will not get stung. So I'm a retired pediatrician, so occasionally I would see a child that had an anaphylactic reaction to honeybees. So what do you do if you're one of these very few kids that have an anaphylactic reaction to bees? And that child, I think, needs to be a little bit more careful, only because although the risk is minimal, the outcome would be disastrous for that very small population of kids. But again, bees do not want to sting. Every weekend when I bring flowers in from my garden into the house for a bouquet, there are always several bees around it. And when I get to the door, I say, ladies, time to leave. I have to bring these flowers in. They never bother me.
I think education there is important, just, educating about exposure and the fact that they're not, if there's nothing there to protect too, it wouldn't really be much of an issue.
Excellent. All right. Well, Michael, we had a question about the videos and whether or not you'd be willing to share where they are available.
They're all on the internet. I don't remember where I got each one from, but there's plenty there. Just put in B and or whatever, and you'll see they'll all pop up.
Okay. Excellent. And of course, we will have the recording of this presentation available for everybody as well. Okay, so I don't see any other questions in the chat box. And Emily's got a comment. Awesome. Thank you, Emily, for that. All right, folks, so that's going to wrap up our insect presentation. So our next and our last presenter is going to be John Traunfeld. So he's going to help us learn how to select the right plants for your school garden. So thank you so much, Michael, for your time and your presentation. Much appreciated. I'm going to go ahead and pass the presentation capabilities over to John. So for any participants on the webinar, feel free to take a quick break right now if you need it, and we'll be back in just a moment. All right, folks, so we're going to go ahead and move on to our last presentation. This is John. I don't think he needs an introduction, but for those of you that don't know him, he's the director of the Home and Garden Information Center and also fruit and veggie specialist for Extension. So he's going to help us decide the best plants to use when you're planning and planting a school or youth garden. Welcome, John. Thank you.
Thank you, Steph. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here. I want to thank Steph and Jean for organizing the webinar. And so as opposed to having just 20 or 25 people face-to-face, we had over 60 people today, and that's really great. I'm going to present on some good plants for youth gardening, and there will be a focus on vegetable crops. And there may be a little bit of overlap with Heather's wonderful presentation. She covered a lot of ground, and you may see some of the same plants, but perhaps in a different context. So, how should we go about selecting plants? I think it helps to start with the particulars of your situation. The why. Why are we growing a garden? What are the goals? Who are we working with? Just as an example, if you work with younger kids, you probably have noticed that they can have trouble planting and dealing with very small seeds or growing crops that require hand thinning or staking or things like that. So having adult helpers in the garden can certainly allow for a wider variety of plants. Where are we growing? So schools, location will determine crop selection to a large degree. Indoor gardening, for example, limits us mostly to things like leafy greens and growing transplants for outdoor gardens. I know Heather covered the shoulder seasons. That's typically where a lot of our school gardens, the time period in which they operate. So March through the end of the school year, and then when kids return until frost. And if you're lucky enough to be able to keep kids going through the summer in a summer youth gardening program, that's terrific. So all of that will help determine what is grown. And of course, what type of specific garden are we talking about? Is it a container, a raised bed, or an in-ground garden? One thing I'd like to mention is that it's really important just to learn all you can about the specific growth requirements for the crops that you do select. And a lot of information on these crops can be found on the Home and Garden Information Center website. The crop profiles, we have information on, starting from seed, problems, plant and pest problems as well. Okay, the next 3 slides will illustrate the connection between garden type and crop choice. Container gardening is a great choice for all kinds of youth gardens. Containers come in many sizes and types, and they allow you to grow just about any crop. They do dry out more quickly than raised beds, so you do have to pay close attention to watering. The particular container garden in these slides, many of you probably recognize as the earth box. It has a reservoir of water that plant roots are able to grow down into. So it's called a self-watering container. That doesn't mean you can walk away from it for the summer. In fact, large, fast-growing plants in the summer still will need to be watered every couple of days in this type of container. We see earth boxes frequently in school garden projects. This photo, or these set of photos, show several years ago at an elementary school in Montgomery County. The earth box is very durable. It's deep enough to grow pepper, tomato, bean, cucumber, and other warm season crops. And you can buy them with casters and trellises. It makes them even more versatile. And here they're being used primarily to grow leafy greens. And you could actually grow multiple crops of leafy greens for 9 months out of the year simply by moving the earth box to catch either more sun or less sun. Salad tables and salad boxes are a fun do-it-yourself project. They're inexpensive to build and excellent for leafy greens. So you can do this in just 3 inches of growing media. Beans, tomatoes, peppers, and other crops can be grown if the depth is increased. And if you look at the lower left photo, you can see the salad greens have been harvested. And in most cases, leafy greens will regrow after being cut at the soil line. And this is often referred to as cut and come again harvesting. And you can certainly search the HGIC website for lots of information on building and using salad boxes and salad tables. Okay, on to raised beds. Let's take a look at a couple of these. Both are very productive, but they take slightly different approaches. So on the left, well, first let's mention the fact that a raised bed is really a wooden container in this case. They're wooden containers that are connected to the soil. So photo on the left, that's from an elementary school in Prince George's County. The raised bed was constructed on site on top of turf. And so the box was filled with growing media, and over a period of just a few weeks, the turf will have been killed by the weight of the soil and not having any sunlight. So the turf decomposes slowly and steadily, and the plant roots, can grow right down through it. The shade from the building in the photo on the left is helping these cool season crops, grow very well into the summertime. On the right, the raised bed, this is at the Kennedy Krieger campus in Baltimore, and it's a bed of Asian greens. This is the fall of the year. This was an existing garden space. They just raised the soil level and put the boards around it to create the raised bed. And if the plants were covered with a floating row cover over the fall and winter, these plants could possibly survive and regrow in the spring. And in particular, we've noticed that plants such as kale, spinach, arugula, collards, and some lettuces will reliably overwinter in most parts of Maryland if they're protected with floating row cover material. And climate change is making all of this even more likely, that we can have crops overwinter. Okay, leafy greens are the dominant plant group, I would say, in youth garden projects, and they will be prominently featured in this presentation. For all these reasons, they are a good choice. We can grow them throughout the year. They come in many sizes and shapes. They do tend to grow fast. They take up a relatively small amount of space, and most of them can withstand a light frost. And here are the 3 major plant families for leafy green vegetables. I would point out that turnip, radish, and beet are 3 leafy greens that also produce edible storage roots, which makes them extra special. The lettuce family, Asteraceae, does also include some edible plants that we don't typically find in a food garden because they're bitter. Things like escarole, endive, and chicory. And the amaranth family is another good choice for leafy greens. And I will, at the end of the presentation, share some useful links to HGIC web's resources for planting and growing a variety of the leafy greens that we'll be talking about. The crop in the lower right there, magenta spring, I don't know if anybody's grown that. It's just another, it's an amaranthus, that's the genus. Another leafy amaranth that has a very spectacular coloration that has made it pretty popular. So the germination and growth rates can vary somewhat between these plant families and even between species within the three families. Now, these are all just, averages. They will vary, the rates will vary depending on a lot of factors, such as air and soil temperature, soil type, spacing, etc. The mustard family certainly germinates the most quickly. It's just 1 to 2 days typically if the temperatures are, around 70 degrees. Spinach is quite slow to germinate, but you can accelerate the process by rubbing the seeds with sandpaper or soaking them prior to planting. Now, all of these three families produce fairly small seed. The mustard family seeds are very small. They're round and they're dark in color, which makes them somewhat difficult for young gardeners to plant. Okay, you've selected your crops to grow, but now find yourself overwhelmed by the incredible number of varieties that are available. And indeed, if you go to a garden center, you could find, 3 to 5 different cultivars of many of the different crops that we're discussing. If you went to a seed catalog, you would find maybe dozens of different cultivars. Hybrid cultivars may have enhanced disease resistance and grow more vigorously, but the seed will probably cost more. I think the key message I would like to get across here is that in Maryland or in the mid-Atlantic, most of the cultivars for the crops that we're talking about here will grow just fine. We all have our favorites, and certainly some will be better than others under certain circumstances, but all of them will perform just fine. Okay, most youth have some familiarity with lettuce and may be more likely to eat it and like it. So it is a really great standby youth garden crop. The cultivar in the lower left photo is speckled trout. So you see just a fantastic variety in leaf shape, color, which makes them quite interesting. And you can see the plant in the top right, that's Cracoviensis. It's a leaf lettuce growing in an individual container. Okay, this is one of the easiest ways to grow leafy greens, and that is indoors in a flat, any kind of container really, with supplemental light. Very few vegetable plants are going to grow satisfactorily in nothing but natural light indoors. And so we need to use fluorescent light or LED light. And I would also, and you can see at the bottom, the advantage of using a no-hole flat, so a container that does not have holes in the bottom. It seems a little counterintuitive. How will the excess water drain away? Well, it doesn't. The advantage is that you can water less and you don't have to worry about how to deal with the drainage water. And you can see the roots from this flat of leafy greens is just growing, at the bottom, growing together as a mat. And this allows for bottom watering, and you can be very successful with this. Another thing to point out, the growing media that we typically use, soilless mixes that have peat and coconut coir and things like that, there's always a small amount of fertilizer added. So for these crops, we can usually grow them for at least 4 to 6 weeks without having to fertilize. And that's a nice advantage. Okay. Here's a good example of the differential germination and growth rate of different plant families. You can see lettuce on the far right is growing pretty rapidly. To the left immediately is, I think, a leafy amaranth growing much more slowly. And then to the left of that, you probably recognize basil, and that's a very slow growing plant. And then further to the left, that's either beets or Swiss chard. So you can see how it really makes sense to group your plant families together, grow them in separate flats. Don't mix plant families or you get this kind of variable germination. One of the things that I really love about leafy greens is that they lend themselves to hands-on examination and manipulation. They're pretty tough plants, although we tend to think they're so tender and we're going to hurt them if we, pull them apart and hold them, but they'll do just fine. You can gently remove them from a container, and you can show your kids how to do that. You can separate them into individual plants. You can transplant them. You could perform experiments. You could have kids cut off, 2 inches of the root system and replant them and compare results with root systems that were left intact. So I just encourage you to really help your students learn that they can confidently learn how to gently handle the plants, move them, manipulate them. Okay, we have to think ahead about when and how we're going to be harvesting leafy greens. So these harvest stages can serve as guidelines. And the thing, of course, we definitely want to avoid is bitter flavors from overly mature or stressed plants. Here we have leafy greens that grew 1 plant per 3-inch by 3-inch square container. They were harvested, you can see in the bottom right photo, and then put back under the shop light to regrow. So this was all done indoors. You can start out by planting several seeds in each cell pack and then thinning to 1 plant per container, or you could plant seeds closely together and then transplant the seedlings into the larger containers. You cannot easily grow a full-size head of lettuce in a classroom. So, kids may be wondering, well, how come it won't get as big as what we see in the supermarket? I'm not saying that's impossible. I think with LED lighting, it's probably quite possible, actually, but you'd have to give each plant, a space 9 inches by 9 inches or so, or even more, and really make sure they were getting enough water and nutrients. So here's what full-size lettuce heads, on the left side, we have 2 leaf lettuces, and the top right is a bib type lettuce. So these were harvested from an outdoor raised beds where the seeds were planted fairly closely and then they were thinned out. And I know everybody that's worked with kids in the garden has funny stories about how upset kids can get when you murder the thinnings, when you thin plants, and sort of just as an experienced gardener, you may just cast off those extra plants. And how can we do that to those babies? And so it's great to eat the thinnings, and you could certainly, divide the thinnings out and pot them up. In this case, to get these full-size heads, of course, we did have to thin out plants that were sown thickly in the row in that raised bed. Okay, just, I'm not sure if Heather talked much about microgreens. I think I've got 3 quick slides. This is a super fun way to introduce kids to growing edible plants. It's very easy to do. Microgreens are pretty expensive in the store, but you can grow them for less money in the classroom or at home. There are a huge number of plastic food containers, as we well know, that can be repurposed and reused. Shallow containers that are only a few inches deep work best. And in some cases, as in the photos here, you can remove the solid lid and use it as a saucer to allow for bottom watering. If you have some money in your budget, you can try this 2-part system. The top part of the system is that 20-row black seedling tray to the right. It looks like 20 furrows. They cost about $3.50. They'll last for many years. There are holes at the bottom of each of those furrows. And so, of course, you fill the furrows with growing media, and the media will just be maybe an inch deep once it settles, and it's wetted first, of course, and then it'll settle. You press it down with your finger, and you can sow the seeds right on top. You don't have to plant the seeds when you're growing microgreens. Just lay them out on the top of the media. It's very difficult to gauge this. The goal is that there may be a 1/4 inch apart. But if you just press them into the soil, you'll have much cleaner greens that will germinate and grow, and they'll do just fine. It's very difficult to plant seeds in that kind of a situation. So just place them on top, press them in. And the second part of the system is that bottom flat on the left. I suggest a shallow seedling flat like this. If you try to use a standard size greenhouse flat, they're taller, they're flimsier, and what happens is when you put that 20-row tray into the greenhouse flat, it'll bow in the middle. It's just too heavy and it'll bow. Okay. So you can see that these seedling flats on the lower left, that's the 20-row flat. You're looking at it from the edge. And in one flat, you can have 800 to 1,000 plants. It's a huge number of plants. That only takes about a tablespoon of seed, but it's something to think about. That's a lot of seed. So you want to not purchase hybrid seed. That would be more expensive. And you want to try to buy seed in large package sizes if you're going to do this on a regular basis, and that'll help keep this cost down. You'll see some weird excess root hair growth when you plant brassicas. It's just that there's a proliferation of these fine white root hairs looking for moisture. Some people think it's a fungus, but it's not, so don't worry about that. And the leaves you see here are the seed leaves or the cotyledons. You can see the vigorous root growth that results from the bottom watering. So the roots are actually sitting in a shallow reservoir of water. And when it comes time to harvest, we're actually harvesting the stem and the cotyledons and just the beginnings of the new leaves that are starting to emerge. There's not going to be any regrowth because we're cutting it at such a young stage. Microgreens can be ready in as little as 10 days, and they do hold up well in the refrigerator. We also know from University of Maryland research and research from other universities that microgreens are super high in nutrition. They have, in terms of phytochemicals, they have a higher content than the mature plants. Okay, let's turn our attention to the mustard family of leafy greens. As some of you may recognize some of these crops on the left, very interesting looking leaves, and that of course is kale. In this case, it's the cultivar. It has many names. lacinato, Tuscan, dinosaur, palm tree. It's quite an interesting plant with interesting texture. And in the upper right, Russian red kale, another pretty popular plant for leafy greens. And then lower right, red giant. There's some similar red mustards. One's called Osaka purple. All of the mustard family of leafy greens can be harvested at any stage of regrowth. And as I mentioned, the kale in particular will overwinter pretty nicely now in Maryland if it has some protection. Okay, and here are a variety of the mustard family members that are growing in raised beds outdoors. So in the upper left, we've got pak choi. It's growing in early fall. I think this is also at Kennedy Krieger in Baltimore. It takes about 50 to 60 days for the pak choi to reach this stage or to a mature stage from seeding. The lower left, arugula, it's a terrific spring or fall crop. It might be a bit of a stretch for kids in terms of the flavor, but it'd be kind of neat to introduce them to it and see what they think. And it also has been really overwintering pretty well in a lot of people's gardens with a little bit of protection. And arugula will reach maturity in about 40 days from planting. Collards on the right are more heat loving. They can reach a much larger size than what we see in the photo there. And they can take 70 to 90 days to mature. A number of the leafy greens are long day plants. They flower with more than 12 hours of daylight, and those would include beet, spinach, chard, lettuce, radish, turnip, kale and mustard, and are day neutral. Just as a point of information. These are really fun turnips to grow. Kids love to dig up crops. It's a big reveal. And with these fast-growing turnips, Hakurai, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it, and the Chinese red, these two cultivars will reach baby size in 30 days and full size in just 40 to 50 days. They're sweet and tender. You can slice them and actually eat them raw. And it's just great to have crops that do double duty. We can eat the leafy tops and harvest the storage roots. If you've been to any of my other classes, you may have seen these two photos because I love to share them. Kent Phillips is a Howard County Master Gardener who grew this cauliflower and this broccoli plant in 5-gallon buckets. So he planted transplants in the buckets probably in mid-April. He kept a close eye on them, made sure they got enough water and nutrients by fertilizing them. And it would be possible in many areas of Maryland to have harvestable heads by the very end of the school year. You could also, if you had transplants ready to go as soon as kids came back to school in early September, it would be possible to do the same thing in the fall. I don't know that Ken's tried that. So what we're looking at here is not for beginners necessarily, but it's certainly doable. And it's a lot of fun to see this. It's pretty spectacular. I want to share Project Spudnik with you. So this is an innovative Master Gardener program in Calvert County. It's a youth gardening program. They're working with teens. And they're using a large number of fabric grow bags. I think I saw Heather had talked about those as well. So these are inexpensive, reusable bags that come in many colors and sizes. You can fold them and store them over the winter. When roots grow into the fabric, they are air pruned, which then promotes root branching. So although I haven't seen any specific research about the fabric bags, I think that they are very good from that standpoint. I think they are promoting a more extensive root system that way. Lots of veggies can be grown in the fabric bags. In this case, they used bags that were between, I think, 10 and 20 gallons in size. Notice in particular the potato plants growing in the foreground of the photo on the left. We can see, I'm not sure exactly, this is probably, I'm guessing, in April or perhaps May. They have been harvesting about 3 pounds of potatoes per bag. And, so is it feasible to do this in a school garden with potatoes? I don't really know, but I think it would be fun to try. We could dig out the new potatoes once these plants have flowered, and that could possibly happen by early June. So this could be a fun crop to try. And you can see on the right Swiss chard and other crops growing in these bags. And by the way, I wrote a blog article about Project Sputnik that came out in the last Friday's Maryland Grows blog. So if you're not following this blog, it's really terrific. Krista Kerrigan and Dan Adler from HGIC are coordinating it, managing it. We have lots of guest bloggers. We're always looking for new guest bloggers, hint, hint. And there was also an earlier blog this year on salad tables. So just something to check out. And one more slide, potatoes in containers. This is an example of a master gardener in Montgomery County, Pat Lynch, who tried this at home. She actually was kind of underwhelmed by the results. She did everything right, used a great mixture of soilless growing media and compost. And I think she did try to grow fingerling potatoes, but and I don't know. She told me how much they weighed. I don't remember. Some people may look at that pile of little potatoes and think that's a miracle, but Pat thought it was not really what she expected. She thought she would get more, but it's kind of a fun thing to try with kids, I think. And one more example, this is from the Anne Arundel County Master Gardeners, and I wish I knew how many pounds they had harvested from this laundry basket. So quite interesting use of a container. It's got floating row cover on the inside there to keep the growing mix inside the container. And they did have some success growing potatoes that way. Okay, I know that Heather did talk about sweet potatoes and propagation. I've got a couple of slides. I think this is a great crop for people to try with youth. You can teach a lot of subjects around the sweet potato. It has a fascinating history. It grows very well in Maryland. Throughout recent human history, its productivity and versatility has helped prevent or limit famine in China and other countries. We can eat all parts of the plant. It stores well, it propagates easily, and it's a really good choice in the face of climate change because it can take high heat and drought and grow on fairly poor soils. I mean, it'll do better, of course, on fertile soils, but it's very adaptable. So in this shot, rather than growing slips from a sweet potato that's placed in a jar of water, as Heather had shown, in this case, sweet potatoes were sliced in half longitudinally and bedded down on a couple of inches of growing media. Then the roots that were cut lengthwise were covered with some growing media. And voila, we have these plants just growing profusely from the roots, and they are called slips. We can grow these indoors under fluorescent lights. And one really cool thing about the sweet potato is we are propagating it vegetatively. And once we get the shoots to grow, we can propagate the cuttings from these shoots. So at each of the black lines that you see, we could make a cut and it's actually creating a peg. That part of the stem is called a peg. You can handle it, and right above the peg is a bud and a leaf below the bud. So when we take that peg and plant them in individual pots, we can make many plants. In this case, we can get 5 plants from this one shoot. And the peg will actually establish roots in about 7 to 10 days, and then we can plant them outside. So if we plant and care for the slips before the end of the school year, we can come back and harvest the roots in September. And on the left, this is actually a shot from the Master Gardener Learning Garden at State Fair. And on the right are some sweet potatoes being harvested. They will make rapid growth over the summer. The plants will sprawl and smother weeds. And so they could actually be maintained with relatively little effort compared to other warm season crops like tomatoes, squash, etc. So it's possible you could come back at the end of at the beginning of the next school year and be able to harvest sweet potatoes with the students. I just wanted to mention herbs because they are so fabulous. Kids love to smell and taste them. These are 3 of the easier herbs you can start from seed in containers or in raised beds. Cilantro and anise hyssop will actually self-sow. That is, the plants will flower. They'll make seeds that drop to the ground to start new plants. And these 3 herbs and many more are also great for attracting a wide range of beneficial insects, from pollinators to ladybird beetles. And you can see bumblebees on the basil and on the anise hyssop. So I'll just close the presentation with some photos of the fabric bag pollinator garden at Project Sputnik. I know Michael talked about insects and pollinator crops, and so it just gives you an idea of what can be done in a very small space using, in this case, these fabric bags, and they produce just a beautiful butterfly garden. And you can see that monarch on the right. And so resources, the links at the bottom, if you do go to the youth gardening page on the Home and Garden Information Center website, there are 2 PDFs in particular that will help support this presentation. GE 133, 20 vegetable crops for school container gardens, and then a PDF that I just put up the other day, crops for youth gardening. So it goes through the specifics for growing most of the crops that we talked about today. And I would ask you all to please evaluate me. My bosses would like that too. And you can go to this web link at your leisure and select my name from the drop down. You can select today's date. The program topic would be Master Gardener, and there are just 5 questions. Thanks, Steph. And so that is all I've got, and I'd be happy to answer questions.
Excellent. Thanks so much, John. Looks like we've got some questions coming in here, so I'll just go ahead and get started. So in regards to potting mix, at what point do you need to switch out what you're using in a container garden? Can any of the nutrient loss be mitigated by adding something like
You don't have to, I can read it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Steph. So what I would recommend, these mixes, whether it's leaf grow or soilless mix, they are relatively expensive. And so what we have found, it's not based on research, but just on observation, is to cut the old potting mix 50-50 with new potting mix or compost. So rather than throwing it all out, just rejuvenate it by having a 50-50 mix of old and new mix. And what happens is, you're right, that you lose nutrients, so you will have to fertilize these potting mixes that have been used for 6 to 9 months or more. And what happens is that they physically start to break down, and that's really the concern, that we lose pore space as these mixes continue to decompose. Let's see, supplemented with anything. Yeah, I think a 50-50 mix is great, compost and soilless mixes. And you can use either 100% compost or 100% soilless mix as well. Either one will work.
Any other questions? You guys can keep putting them into the chat box. Looks like we've got one more, John.
Outdoor class. That one I would recommend. I think Heather probably shared some resources, and I don't know whether they're all on the FSNE website, but Heather is the expert on that. I don't work directly with kids in gardens very much, so I would punt that one to Heather.
Yeah, Heather's got some resources that she's going to make available for everybody. So we'll be sending those out with the follow-up after this
Yeah,
session.
and then the next question, there are a couple of companies like Organic Mechanics is one out of Pennsylvania. I think you can find their stuff in garden centers, and their mixes are made with compost and coconut coir. They don't use peat moss, so it is possible to grow beautiful container plants or transplants without using peat moss. And let's see, I plant sweet potatoes around tomatoes to keep oh, that's cool. Nice tip there. Actually, so here again, kids might be really concerned about stepping on the vines, but those vines can take it. And even if some of them got a little bit trampled, it's not going to really diminish the yield because they are so prolific. So that's a neat tip. Bulk coconut coir companies. I don't know. I'd say just search online, but I don't know offhand about buying it in bulk. Nursery suppliers, I suppose, would have it. Try Maryland. Oh shoot, what's it called? I can't think of it. Anyway, yeah, I would just search online. Yes, definitely you can eat sweet potato leaves.
Is it Maryland Plants and Supplies that you're thinking?
Yes,
of?
yes.
On Yellow Brick Road. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I didn't want you to see me in my bunker.
We can see you when you're
Yeah.
bunker, just FYI.
I just allowed that.
Thank you.
I wanted you to see it.
Okay, folks, any more questions? This is our last session of the day. So if there's anything from any of our previous sessions, I believe Michael and Heather are also both still on the line. So if you have any questions about anything else for today's session, now's the time to ask. If not, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up.